Welcome back. Now, today is the 12th of November, a day, according to our next guest, that was hugely important in Ireland long ago. Central to this day was the pig, who was kept, fattened and eventually killed to provide the rich store of food for the winter months.
We're delighted to have Shane Lahan here with us, and more importantly, he's brought food with him because we're all starving today.
We are. He hasn't cooked any of it.
It's cooked already.
Well, it's cooked already. But you know what I mean. You know what I mean.
Sinead, we're missing a trick in this country. We should have a national day, and it should be called Black Pudding Day, because of all the days of the year, if you went back in time, this was a day when puddings were everywhere. And it goes back to the day of Martinmas. And just to give you a little, St. Martin, okay, Irish people have this lovely association with different saints, okay? He was a saint originally in Europe and centred around Tours in France and so on. But Irish people, we bring our saints to ourselves, you know, and we have the idea that he was roaming around the countryside. Irish saints are always on the... And he came in the door one day and went to this poor woman, and of course the saint coming in, she was all a fluster, you see, she didn't know what to do. So she took out all her flour and she started making this big, large loaf of bread. And he came in, he said, "What are you at?" She said, "Look, I have nothing for you. I'd love to give you hospitality, and this is all I have." He said, "I'll tell you what now, I'll provide something that in future everyone can provide hospitality." So they took the big loaf of bread, he put a big container over it, okay? He said, "In the morning now we'll see what's there." The Colleen, who was an Imshire, who was helping inside in the kitchen, she got all the little bits of dough and she put them under a bowl, and that was fine. In the morning, anyway, they came down, excuse me, and what happened is Martin does a little bit of blessing. He pulls up the container, and what's underneath but a big sow and a whole 12 bonnets suckling off the sow. And he says, "There you are now. This is a pig," he says, "and from here on in, you can kill the pig for hospitality." What happened next? The little girl picked up the little bowl with all the little bits of dough, and then they turned into mice and rats, and they started scurrying everywhere around. And of course, what happens next? St. Martin, he took off his mitten. This is a mitten here, okay? He threw it after, of course, the rats and the mice, and it turned into a cat. So in one day, St. Martin invented mice, rats, cats, and of course, the pig. And the pig was always killed around this time, because you see, you'd never keep a pig alive right throughout the winter months. This was the time to doing it and to salt it down. So that was the idea. But we have ideas of pigs now, okay, of big fat lumps of pigs, pink pigs. They weren't like that at all before, okay? There's a lovely example of that. That's up in the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum. I took that little video of all the little bonnets and they suckling away from the sow. But that's an unusual pig, because that's a large white, as we call it. And in the past, we had a different type of pig. In fact, they were kind of half wood pigs, if you like, okay? And they were called greyhound pigs, because they were tall.
Okay? Like a boar, were they?
But they were half a boar, but they had long legs, Dottie, right?
Yeah.
And they could run every bit as fast as a greyhound, okay? And they had lop ears. And not only that, you could train them, okay? You could call them and they'd sit down. They were very intelligent. There's a great story about a fellow called Phil Purcell. He was the pig drover. He went over to England with a big load of pigs one time, okay? And what happened to him is that he'd sell them at the mart in England, and the squire would go away and he'd lock them in their yard. And what would Phil do at night? He'd go outside the gate, he'd whistle, and next minute, they could jump over a 5-bar gate, all the pigs would come out again, he'd go down to the next town, and he'd sell them all again. So, you know...
He's a relative of Dottie, was he?
Well, I'll tell you what, he was there. But I suppose the pig was important, because right back into our antiquity, you know, pigs were there, I suppose, as soon as the end of the last ice age. They were there during the Celtic period. We know that in the Brehon laws, a man was to have 3 snouts. One snout in the ground like a plough, one snout in the sty, and another snout hanging up the rafters to offer hospitality, the snout of the flitch of bacon that was there. So, and we go right back. The pig was synonymous, of course, with the potato. The potato was great for fattening the pig. The gentleman that paid the rent. And you know, I look at illustrations long ago of Ireland in the 19th century and 18th and 19th century. There are young fellas asleep on top of pigs. The pig was inside the house. Look, there's a lovely example.
Because the pig was warm, I suppose.
The pig was warm, and it was like...
Nice big pillow.
He was the gentleman that paid the rent, okay? You were going to sell the pig to pay the rent and so on. But you know what? He was also, for people then, he was their main source of food. So, and this is where we come to, on this yesterday was the day when pig killing began. And, you know, I've been interviewing people for years about this, and it's a story people love. What I really like is that there was a humane side to pig killing. It wasn't a negative thing. First of all, it was unlucky to kill your own pig. you always got somebody else to do it for you, and that was you pushing away. The second thing was usually was the blacksmith, the strongest man in the village would come in, but he also had the utensils, you know. And people used to they used to do a number of things. They would stun the pig. They would stick the pig, as we call it. And a lot of that was to collect the blood, and the blood, of course, was important for the puddings.
Yeah.
A huge source of protein, not to be wasted.
There was nothing wasted at all in it, though.
No, everything but the squeal, as they say, for the pig. Everything was used, right? You'd get a day off school if you held the bucket for the blood that was there. You'd stir the blood, you'd keep it for quite. You'd add salt into it. That was kept for the puddings later on, okay? But what was really important then is you'd need to shave the pig.
Yeah.
So boiling water was put over the skin, and of course they take out the cutthroat razors were used, and knives were used, and everything, and you'd shave away the top of the pig to get it.
We have a picture here as well, Shane.
Oh yeah.
This is what's happening here, and the fella to the back there on the left, that's my grandfather, Danny and Dan.
Isn't it fantastic? And I love the picture, Dahi. And I look at the excitement in his face, because this was a day of excitement. And I'll tell you why. This was a day of plenty. And this was almost like Christmas, because the day of the pig, you had to eat now the food that couldn't be stored, it couldn't be preserved. So it was a day of great enjoyment altogether.
But all the village got a part of it, didn't they?
Absolutely, and that was it. And we go back to the puddings. So the puddings are a well-known part of it. What came out of the pig, of course, was the casings, were the intestines. They had to be washed, and the women would go off. They'd find a stream for doing that. They'd be scraped out, meticulously clean, and kept in a basin in salt water. And then the mixture for the pudding would be made up. So you had the blood that was there. The pinhead oatmeal would be brought in. Some people would grind that themselves. All little lovely cuts of the fat from the pig would be put in, okay? And then any amount of white pepper, salt, of course, put in. And then people used to put in all sorts of spices. I've been interviewing people. They'd put in any old thing for a spice.
Anything that was going.
White pepper in particular. Cloves were put in. Cinnamon was put in. Anything that was good to give it a bit of a zing or a bit of a quality.
And it probably didn't need it.
Onions, of course, as well. And herbs as well put in. But every single pudding was different. And there was a kind of a competition between the women in the locality. But you couldn't store the puddings, you see, and that was important. They would pack them into the intestine, okay, not fully in. They would tie the bottom, tie the top, prick it all over with a pin, and put it boiling for about an hour. And then it came out. When it came out, and look, isn't this just a gorgeous thing? I think this should be one of our major national foods, this particular beautiful black pudding that was there. And
it is becoming something of a gourmet food,
it
though,
is,
isn't it?
and it's moved away from this peasant food you made to being something that, the best restaurants, And when you when you go on and you see our black pudding that it's there, it's fantastic. But I think what's interesting, there were two other elements that were there. One, the stomach was often filled with a potato stuffing, just ordinary onions and thyme and potatoes. But in it, that was put into the bastable pot. That was called a mock goose. A mock goose, because the lovely outer part of the stomach actually was browned inside in the bastable. The other one, of course, that everyone wanted was the bladder. And the bladder, of course, was the plaything for the children.
The football.
This was the football. And I suppose in Kerry, this was very popular in its own way.
It was called cod too, wasn't it?
That's right. That was the cod. And what happened is you'd often get a little piece of a feather and you'd blow it up, okay, after it dried a little bit, and then you'd have a piece of twine, and just when you'd have blown, you'd tie it. And the football was everything, and people looked forward to that no end whatsoever.
It's interesting you say they use literally every bit of it.
Every single
every bit
of the pig. But there was another part, right? Because we're used to the whole idea of getting all our meat salted and finished. You had to go salting the pig then after that. And I brought in some salt to you because you might need a big, I
thought it was a bowl of rice you had.
No, this is salt here. This is rough salt, okay? And it was hard work to do this. It could take maybe about 2 hours to go salting a pig. So it was cut up into maybe 10, 12 different parts. You had hams and you had flitches, you had sides, you had hocks, you had all sorts of things. And lads used to come in for the salting night, okay? And they loved that because the griskins, which were the bits, and the pork steak and all the little bits were being cooked and made at that point in time. So what happened is they used to have on their hand, they used to have a wooden brush, if you like, without any bristle. But on the other side would be hobnails, okay, hammered in, and a little leather strap that was there. And you would be going all night, pushing the salt into the meat until you'd be sweating, and the meat would be sweating. But there was fierce messing going on. And fellas would be grabbing salt and putting it down fella's trousers, or putting it down his back, right, or throwing it at a fella, and there'd be fighting. And people loved this activity. And then when it was salted down, was packed into a barrel, kept in there for a good period of time. Some people would make a pickle. They'd often take the bag of salt, they'd boil it up. The hydrometer that they had for testing the specific gravity, that was a potato, and if the potato floated up on top of that, it was ready. The brine would cool down, you'd pour it into the barrel.
And that was it.
Left in there for maybe 4 weeks or thereabouts, taken out then, hung up on the rod across in front of the fire.
I remember all that.
Some people would do all sorts of different things. That's not particularly Irish scene, but that will show you the same activities that were there.
All around Europe.
But what was so interesting is that you'd wrap it in brown paper as well to stop the flies maybe going at it if it was going to be kept for a long time. People loved the crystal that would come on the well-salted piece. Sometimes if a fella didn't work hard at the salting, he'd be blamed if it went a bit grey, right? You know, some pieces were
there was too much
all
messing
together.
that night with that
Or
fella.
a bit of hairy bacon, as we say, if it wasn't shaved properly. So there is so much lore and so much information about the pig at this time of the year. It's incredible, really.
And so much joy around it.
So much joy around it.
Fun,
Yeah,
you know,
and
obviously not, you know.
And you were looking forward to it, especially because you cooked, as I said, the fresh meat. You cooked the puddings, you cooked the pork steak, you cooked the griskins and so on. And even we think about sausages today, you know. The sausages that we have today are industrial sausages. This essentially, the black pudding, is the sausage.
Shane, we have to leave it there.
We
Thank you so much, and happy Martinmas to you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to celebrate it.
And to all the family. Now, we have a small bit of business to do before we head